Hey everyone! Throughout modern history, scientists and engineers have been creating powerful steam engines to fulfill many purposes. So for today's video, I'm going to count down the top 15 largest steam-powered vehicles ever made. Number 15. The RMS Titanic. An infamous ocean liner, and perhaps the most well-known, is the RMS Titanic. Sister to the RMS Olympic, the Titanic was launched in 1912 by White Star Line and was the largest ocean liner to ever set sail at over 882 feet long with a 92.5-foot beam and a 34-foot draft. Spread across 9 decks, the Titanic was also known for having just about every amenity on board as long as you were in the right class. It was designed for opulence, class, and grace rather than speed. She had a modest cruising speed of just 21 knots to get her across the Atlantic, and the shipbuilders made sure that no expense was spared during her design, so she could surpass many of the other luxuries found on other ships, like a pool and sauna for the first-class passengers, plumbing features for the second-class staterooms, and even single-family third-class berths. She truly was wonderful and lived up to her name. The Titanic was powered by coal with boilers located at the bottom of the ship, and 2 reciprocating engines roared at the rear. Steam would come up from the boilers to power the engines and then pass through to a turbine powering the center and small propeller. However, while she was famous for her technical prowess, she earned true infamy when she sank during her maiden voyage after striking an iceberg. And because the designers felt too many lifeboats would be an ugly feature, almost 1,500 people died during that night to remember, making the sinking of the Titanic the worst maritime disaster to date. Number 14. 50 lead Pobedi. If you're used to living in a warmer climate, then the idea of an icebreaker ship may sound a bit foreign. So let's go ahead and break the ice with this entry on our list. The ship 50 lead Pobedi is currently the largest icebreaker ship in the world and bursts her way through tough conditions while waving the Russian flag. The name 50 lead Pobedi roughly translates in Russian as 50 years of victory, referring to the Soviet Union's victory over the Axis powers in World War II. This huge icebreaker runs on 2 steam-powered generators, has great maneuverability, and can travel at a top speed of just over 21 knots. Even in the dead of winter, this ship is going full speed ahead. She's a whopping 524 feet long with a displacement of nearly 2,900 tons, and she can rip through ice up to 9 feet thick. Yeah, that's pretty strong. There's plenty of other great icebreaker ships out there too, but when it comes to sailing the waters of the Arctic, no one's coming close. And the fact that she's been doing this for about 30 years is just a testament to her prowess. She's so well known in her home country of Russia that you can even see her on a stamp. And when she's not carrying cargo, you can book her for an Arctic tour and sail around the North Pole. Just make sure to bring a whole lot of layers. Number 13. Norfolk Western 2156. Built in 1942, the Norfolk Western 2156 is the strongest pulling extant steam locomotive in the world. This golden oldie isn't riding the rails ever again, but she's a true steampunk marvel. Out of operation and retired from all rail service for decades now, the hefty Norfolk Western 2156 is owned by St. Louis, Missouri's National Museum of Transportation. She belonged to one of the more efficient and modern steam locomotives used in the United States, and Norfolk Western were known for resisting making the change from the coal-burning steam system of locomotion to the oil-burning diesel trains that would dominate the landscape. The 2156 had a total weight of about 436 tons. She reached a top speed of about 50 miles an hour and spent her final days of operation making mostly mine and coal fuel runs. But despite being the largest steam locomotive in the world, the 2156 was incredibly agile and built for speed. This compound articulated locomotive was amongst the hardest working steam locomotives ever built. The main benefits sought from compounding in this manner are reduced fuel and water consumption, plus a higher power-to-weight ratio due to more expansion in the cylinder before the exhaust valves open, which gives a higher efficiency. That, coupled with the articulated design, allows the locomotive to operate on tracks with tighter curves by allowing the 2 sets of drive wheels to split and turn independently. Number 12. Esso Atlantic. This big oil tanker was owned and operated by Esso Tankers Incorporated. It's one of only 7 ships ever made that had a deadweight capacity of 500,000 tons, with hers being just under 517,000 tons. The Esso Atlantic is no joke and is the vessel you can count on when the heaviest of the heavies need moving. Ever wonder how all those giant oil and gas rigs get out to the middle of the ocean? And don't forget that when they're finally tapped out, they need to come back to port. How about when they need a massive new part? Well, the Esso Atlantic is the one that's lugging all that equipment around for them. It's got a length of 1,300 feet, a beam of 233 feet across, and a fully laden draft of 83 feet, meaning she's another supertanker that's a little too deep and wide in the oceans for many ports. And while she was built back in 1977, the Esso Atlantic had an incredibly good run, making it all the way to the year 2002. And during her service life lasted nearly 3 decades. She ran on a powerful steam turbine propulsion system that carried her through the currents at a top speed of about 16 knots, which is pretty fast for something that massive. In the end, though, she was sold to shipbreakers out in Pakistan and scrapped like so many other supertankers of the time. Number 11. SS Normandy, or the USS Lafayette. Once the pride of France, the SS Normandy sailed the world's oceans from 1935 to 1942, and many historians and enthusiasts will tell you that she was the greatest and most elegant ship to make the transatlantic trip. Built as a direct competitor of Italy's SS Rex, Great Britain's Queen Mary, and Germany's Europa and Bremen, the Normandy was 983 feet long with a 119-foot beam and was spread across 12 decks. She was absolutely stunning and was the crown jewel of the golden age of ocean liners, with the majority of the ship being built just for first class. She showcased the pinnacle of steamship design, accommodations, and service, with her more hydrodynamic hull and streamlined deck design. With her top speed of 32.2 knots, the Normandy was able to capture the blue ribbon multiple times during her 7-year career. But as World War II broke out, the French Normandy was claimed by the U.S. in their New York City port and renamed the USS Lafayette. Despite being made for the upper echelons of society, this newly christened Lafayette was set to be refitted as a troop transport. However, during her transition, a spark from a torch created a fire, and because her fire suppression system had been deactivated, she quickly ignited and went up in flames before ever making it to the European or Pacific fronts. Number 10. Esso Pacific. A ULCC, or an ultra-large crude carrier and sister ship to the world-famous Esso Atlantic vessels, the Esso Pacific entered service as a supertanker in the year 1977 and was built by Hitachi Zosen Corporation in Japan. Just like her sister vessels, the Esso Pacific was a massive oil tanker at over 1,300 feet, a beam of 233 feet, and a 250,000 gross tonnage, with a cargo capacity of 516,000 tons. And although she was built in Japan, the Esso Pacific flew under the flag of the Bahamas with her single-propeller steam turbine propulsion system that let her lug all that crude oil around at a top speed of just over 15 knots. Like her sister ship, the Esso Pacific suffered the same fate after about 25 years in service and was sent to the Gondani shipbreaking yard in Pakistan to be turned into one of the biggest piles of scrap metal you'll probably ever see. When we think of the longest ships in the world, we often think of more modern vessels, but it's important to remember that even as far back as the 1970s, people were working hard to deliver some really long vessels, and the Esso Pacific is the perfect example of that. Number 9. Arctica. Alright, taking the 9th spot on this list is another Soviet-era icebreaker, the Arctica. Now retired, she was a bit of a doozy because overall she's got a nice length of 569 feet and a 112-foot long beam. Plus, she's got a history that's as big as her. It should come as no surprise that the name Arctica literally translates to Arctic in English, letting you know just what this icebreaker is made for. She was in service from 1975 all the way until 2008, and just 2 years after her icy maiden voyage, she was the first ship to ever reach the North Pole. Sadly, neither Santa Claus nor her elves were anywhere to be found, but Arctica's feat was the real gift to the Soviet Union, who were in a race with the United States to see who was the best at just about everything and who could be the first to do, well, anything. So on this front, they won big time. The Pacific North Pole expedition was also dedicated to the 60th anniversary of the October Revolution, making it a double historical win for the Soviets. Arctica was nuclear-powered, but could cut through the ice for a duration of 7.5 months with 189 crew members on board and had a max speed of 18 knots. By 2005, Arctica was also the first nautical vessel to cover over 1 million miles and was the first civilian ship to spend a full year at sea. She's earned every bit of the rest she has since retiring. Number 8. SS Bismarck, RMS Majestic. Coming in at 956 feet long, a beam of over 100 feet, a 36-foot draft, and a gross tonnage of 56,000 tons with 11 decks, the ocean liner formerly known as the SS Bismarck was built in 1914 as a part of the Hamburg America line and kept on the back burner until World War I came to a close. With a top speed of about 26 knots, she wasn't the fastest ocean liner in the sea, but she instead opted for elegance, size, and comfort. She was the sister, or in this case the brother ship, as the Kaiser preferred German ships to be men, to both the Imperator and the Vaterland, and could have ruled the seas had World War I not broken out. She was 70 feet longer than the Titanic and had an improved steam turbine for all 4 propellers, and exhaust vents from the boilers were routed in such a way to allow for long, expansive interior spaces that no other ocean liner had yet to achieve. But despite the shipyard's best efforts, the Bismarck was handed over to Great Britain as part of Germany's war reparations, and she was renamed the RMS Majestic. Number 7. The SS Imperator. In an attempt to outdo the Lusitania and Mauritania and the Olympic-class fleet from White Star, Germany created the massive SS Imperator in 1913 at the height of the Kaiser's power and influence. For starters, he wanted a ship that felt more masculine, referring to the liner as a he instead of the usual she. At 906 feet long with a 98-foot beam and a 35-foot draft, the Imperator was larger than the ill-fated Titanic and became the face of Italian marine nationalism for the golden age of ocean liners. The most recent technological advances were implemented into its design, with new turbines powering the ship's 4 propellers, allowing him to reach a max speed of about 26 knots. But the most visible design element was the 13-foot-tall bronze eagle that towered over a globe it perched on. And while they fell off during a bad storm just 1 year after its maiden voyage, the eagle had an impressive 40-foot wingspan. As World War I broke out, the Imperator chose to sit on the sidelines docked in Hamburg for the duration, although he was constantly stripped for his bronze, which would quickly leave the Imperator in a state of utter disarray, perhaps acting as an omen for how Germany would fare during the war. By the end of the war, though, the Emperor was captured by the United States and converted to a troop transport, and renamed the RMS Berengaria. Number 6. RMS Mauritania. One of the Cunard Line's most successful endeavors, the RMS Mauritania is the sister ship to the Lusitania, having launched in the same year, 1906. She remained in service for almost 30 years, and she was the largest ship in the oceans at 790 feet long, with an 88-foot beam and a 33-foot draft until she was overtaken by the SS Bremen in 1929. But unlike her slightly smaller sister, the Lusitania, the Mauritania was able to survive the First World War and remained a sense of pride and a beacon of hope for Great Britain as she crossed through the Atlantic for 10 years after the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. But the Mauritania wasn't just a sea beast, she was pretty fast too, capturing the coveted blue ribbon several times through her lifetime thanks to her steam turbines powering 4 propellers. The only catch was that when full power was applied, the Mauritania suffered from intense vibrations in the rear, where the 3rd class was located, making for an incredibly bumpy ride for the less wealthy and fortunate passengers, while the 1st class lived in smooth sailing luxury up front. Number 5. Pennsylvania Railroad Class S1. More commonly referred to as the PRR-S1 or the Big Engine, the Pennsylvania Railroad Class S1 is a retro-futuristic classic locomotive. If you can't already tell from just the aesthetics, it was a single experimental duplex locomotive of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was designed to demonstrate the advantages of duplex drives and was the longest and heaviest rigid-frame reciprocating steam locomotive that was ever built. The streamlined Art Deco-style shell of the locomotive was designed by Raymond Loewy in 1939, who would later go on to work for NASA. The S1 had a unique 6-4-4-6 wheel arrangement, meaning it had 2 pairs of cylinders, each driving 2 pairs of driving wheels. To achieve stability at fast passenger train speeds, usually over 100 miles an hour, articulation was not used. At 140 feet long overall, including the engine and tender, the S1 was the longest reciprocating steam locomotive ever. It also had the heaviest tender, about 205 tons, as well as the highest tractive effort of passenger steam engine when built. And it even had the largest driving wheels at 7 feet in diameter ever used on a locomotive with more than 3 driving axles. It clearly had a lot going for it and was more than likely built just to break records. Being the big engine came at a price though. The problem of wheel slippage along with a wheelbase that was too long for many of the rail line's curves limited the S1's usefulness, making it more of an attraction than anything else. It did however make an all-star appearance at the 1939 World's Fair, where the drive wheels operated under locomotive steam power and ran continuously on the roller platform at 60 miles an hour all day long. While no one will ever get to ride in the big engine, it's pretty hard to argue against the idea that it isn't one of the coolest looking steam-powered vehicles ever made. Number 4. 150 HP Case Tractor. When we think of tractors, we don't typically think of steam-powered vehicles tilling the fields. All of that's about to change with the next entry on this list. The 150 HP Case was an experimental steam engine that made its debut all the way back in 1904, quickly becoming the world's largest traction engine. They were originally used for locomotives, with only 9 in existence at the time, but they left the scene as quickly as they were implemented and none of them survived. That is, until more than a century later, someone decided to open up the vault and use the engine to build the world's largest steam-powered tractor. The new 150 HP Case was built by Anderson Industries in South Dakota in 2018 and weighs in at a stunning 75,000 pounds. The comically large tractor is 25 feet long, 14 feet wide, and 14 feet high, and is built with a firebox just under 5 feet long. Now, naturally, something of this size is gonna pack one big steaming punch, producing 5,000 foot-pounds of torque, and it's capable of pulling 44 John Deere plows behind it. But how can something so seemingly old operate at that capacity? Well, the 150 HP Case gets all its power from the 14-inch bore and the 14-inch stroke engine. But despite the strength, the tractor's top speed is just under 6 miles an hour. But what's really impressive here is that the entire rig was built from scratch in just 16 months. And because there are no original surviving 150 HP engines, the team had to conduct a painstaking amount of research to get everything just right. It was no easy task, but with the right team with the perfect amount of passion for steam engines, it's quite clear that anything is possible, including an induction into the Guinness Book of World Records. There's only one of these tractors in existence, though, so if any gearhead out there is looking to see it in all of its steamy glory, then you'll have to head down to South Dakota and get in line. Number 3. The Yellowstone. Alright, not to be confused with one of the biggest shows on television right now, the Yellowstone is one of the largest steam-powered locomotives in history. Yellowstone-type locomotives are articulated steam locomotives that feature a 2884 wheel arrangement, a popular arrangement that can be traced back to 1928 when the American Locomotive Company first produced trains for the famous Northern Pacific Railway. The railway nicknamed the new locomotive after Yellowstone National Park, since the railway ran near the park. There were a total of 72 of these Yellowstone locomotives built, and they operated on a few different railways, but they're most well known for their operation on the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range, hauling incredibly heavy amounts of iron ore, which is needed by powerful locomotives to lead the trains. When placing an order in the early 1940s, the railway was interested in the 2882 arrangements, but operational requirements required extra trailing wheels, and thus Yellowstone was born with the 2884 arrangement. These Yellowstones became a serious American workforce during World War II, but never quite caught on in terms of popularity and enthusiasm, as some of its counterparts did. But despite having only 72 of these 2884 mallet-articulated Yellowstone locomotives spread amongst just 4 railroads, there are only 3 survivors today, all of which remain from the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range Railway. They're all on static display at various museums and historical societies where they'll live out their days as massive relics of the pre-diesel past. Number 2. The Big Boy 4014. The largest single locomotive in existence was a classic product of Union Pacific, the Big Boy 4014. 25 of these big boys were built exclusively for Union Pacific Railroad, the first of which was delivered in 1941. The locomotives were 132 feet long and weighed 1.2 million pounds. Because of their great length, the frames of the big boys were hinged or articulated to allow them to negotiate curves. They had a 4884 wheel arrangement, which meant they had 4 wheels on the leading set of pilot wheels, which guided the engine, 8 drivers, another set of 8 drivers, and 4 wheels following which supported the rear of the locomotive. The massive engines normally operated between Ogden, Utah and Cheyenne, Wyoming. There are 7 big boys on public display in various cities around the country. They can be found in St. Louis, Missouri, Dallas, Texas, Omaha, Nebraska, Denver, Colorado, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Cheyenne, Wyoming. Big Boy number 4014 was delivered to Union Pacific in December of 1941, and the locomotive was retired in December 1961, having traveled over 1 million miles in its 20-year service. Union Pacific reacquired number 4014 from the Rail Giants Museum in Pomona, California in 2013 and relocated it back to Cheyenne to begin a multi-year restoration process. It returned to service in May of 2019 to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad's completion. Number 1. Allegheny Class. Between 1941 and 1948, Lime Locomotive Works built their H8 Allegheny Class locomotives, one of two classes with the 2666 configuration for the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. The coal-hauling trains were large enough to rival the likes of the Big Boy 4014 and Yellowstones, and are some of the largest steam-powered vehicles ever built. At the time, many had believed that diesel power would quickly replace steam, but both Lima and Chesapeake and Ohio built the ultimate high-powered steam locomotives to prove the competition wrong. No diesel engine ever surpassed the output of these behemoths, which were amongst the heaviest steam locomotives ever constructed. The three-axle trailing truck supporting the firebox was unusual yet creative, carrying over 190,000 pounds, allowing the huge firebox needed for the high power. As it turned out, these steam locomotives continued in service for almost another 20 years, in no small part to Allegheny. These locomotives produced 7,500 horsepower and weighed 386 tons on top of the 215-ton carrying capacity. Timing is everything though, and the Allegheny Class arrived just in time for the U.S. entry into World War II, so these locomotives quickly became the train of choice to haul coal throughout Virginia to be shipped off for the war effort. They could make their run twice as fast as the car models they replaced, and could make much of the journey unassisted. Simply put, they were faster, stronger, and better. Today, there are only two surviving Allegheny-class locomotives, both of which retired from service in 1956 and were donated to the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. I'll see you next time.
Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.